Today, we're going to crack open a case file from almost 2,000 years ago. Now, this isn't your typical whodunit. It's an intellectual detective story, pulled right from the ancient pages of the Talmud. And it's filled with logical puzzles, brilliant arguments, and a pretty major twist. So, let's dive in.
So here's the puzzle that gets this whole thing started. Imagine you have a big batch of perfectly good items, but you know for a fact that one of them is, let's say, contaminated. You're forbidden to use it. The problem is you can't tell which one it is. So what do? Do you have to throw everything out? Or is there a smarter way to handle this? This is the exact problem that the ancient sages were wrestling with.
All right, so our investigation kicks off with what seems like a pretty straightforward scenario, the case of the lost ring.
Okay, let's set the scene. In front of us, we've got a collection of exactly 101 rings. And to the naked eye, they all look pretty much the same. But one of them has a hidden, forbidden secret.
And here's where it gets serious. One of these rings was used in idol worship. Now, according to Jewish law, that makes it totally off limits. You can't benefit from it in any way. Can't sell it, can't melt it down, nothing. The trouble is, it's been mixed in with 100 other perfectly fine rings, and there's just no way to know which is which.
And then, something happens. Somebody accidentally drops one of the rings into the Great Sea, the Mediterranean. It's gone, for good. Now we've got 100 rings left, and you'd think we're still stuck with the same problem, right? But this is where the first really clever solution comes into play.
The great sage Rav comes along and offers this beautifully simple answer. He says, all the remaining 100 rings, they're permitted now. Why? Well, we just make a logical assumption. We say that the one ring that fell into the sea was the forbidden one. It's a clean, pragmatic solution that just solves the whole problem. Case closed, right? Well, not so fast. And of course, just like in any good detective story, that first simple solution gets immediately challenged by another really sharp mind. This is where things start to get interesting.
So in comes another sage, Rava, and he pokes a huge hole in this logic. He brings up a different but similar case. He says, look, there's this other law where if one forbidden animal gets mixed into a herd of 10,000 sacrificial offerings, all 10,000 of them have to be left to die. So Rava asks, hey, if Rav's logic is so good, why don't we just use it here? Why not just say the first animal that dies of natural causes was the forbidden one and then permit the rest? It's a brilliant objection, and it shows a pretty big potential inconsistency.
But Rav's camp has a comeback. They argue he isn't just making this up out of thin air. His reasoning is actually based on a legal precedent, one set by an even earlier authority, Rabbi Eliezer. And in a similar case with mixed-up offerings, Rabbi Eliezer does allow for this kind of assumption. So Rav is on solid legal ground, but there's a catch. And here's the fine print. Rabbi Eliezer's permission, and by extension Rav's, comes with a really important condition. You can't just sell the remaining rings one by one. You have to sell them in pairs, 2 by 2. Why? Well, it's a clever legal safeguard. If you sell them in pairs, you can be absolutely certain that in every single transaction, you are definitely profiting from at least one permitted ring. You're never in a situation where you might be benefiting only from that one forbidden item.
Okay, so this whole idea of managing uncertainty takes us to our next puzzle, one that's all about probability and following the majority. So let's imagine a new scenario. Before any ring got lost, the original collection of 101 rings was just separated into 2 different piles.
You've got one pile with 40 rings and another bigger pile with 60 rings. The question is still the same. Where's the forbidden one? And is there a logical way we can figure this out?
So what do the sages do? They apply a principle that's actually pretty intuitive, one we use all the time in stats and risk assessment today. You follow the majority. Since the group of 60 is obviously the larger one, you legally assume the forbidden ring is probably in there. And this has a real-world consequence. The smaller group of 40 rings is now considered totally fine, completely permitted, while the larger group of 60 remains prohibited.
All right, so it seems like we've got a system, right? We can make these pragmatic assumptions, we can follow the statistical majority, but now we get to the big twist, the idol worship exception. And this is where all that tidy logic is about to get thrown out the window.
It really feels like we have a working framework for dealing with all this uncertainty. But what if the forbidden item isn't just any old prohibited thing? What if it's specifically an object of idol worship? Does that change the rules of the game?
And bam, here's the bombshell.
Another great sage, Shmuel, hears all this logic about following the majority, and he just dismisses it completely. He says, when it comes to idol worship, forget about all that. The prohibition is so incredibly severe that any uncertainty, or even an uncertainty of an uncertainty, it's all prohibited. Forever. No clever loopholes, no assumptions, nothing.
And just when you think you've got a handle on it, the plot thickens again. The text immediately hits us with a direct contradiction to what Shmuel just said from an older, very authoritative source. This source says that while a simple uncertainty involving idol worship is forbidden, a compound uncertainty is actually permitted. So now it looks like Shmuel is just contradicting established law. How is that possible?
Okay, so this brings us to the final act of our little investigation. This is where we're going to untangle this whole mess and discover the really elegant solution hiding underneath.
First things first, let's get clear on this key term. What is a compound uncertainty? You can think of it as a doubt on top of a doubt. So for example, imagine one cup from our first contaminated batch of rings falls into a new, massive storeroom full of other rings. Now you have the first doubt. Was that cup even the forbidden one to begin with? And then you have the second doubt. Even if it was, how would you ever find it in this new giant mixture? That's a compound uncertainty.
It turns out the key to solving our entire puzzle is buried in an even older, fundamental disagreement between two other sages, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. And their views are polar opposites. Rabbi Yehuda says that compound uncertainty is always prohibited, no matter what the item is. Rabbi Shimon, on the other hand, argues it's always permitted. So which one is Shmuel following? Well, the brilliant answer is neither and both. Shmuel performs this incredible legal synthesis. He agrees with Rabbi Yehuda's very strict position that compound uncertainty is forbidden, but, and this is the key, he limits that strictness only to the uniquely severe case of idol worship. For every other kind of prohibition, he would actually agree with Rabbi Shimon that it's permitted.
And that is the solution to our mystery. You see, Shmuel isn't actually contradicting that old source that permitted compound uncertainty. That source was just stating Rabbi Shimon's opinion. Instead, Shmuel is creating this incredibly sophisticated middle ground position. He's carving out a unique legal category just for idol worship, treating it with the level of seriousness that nothing else gets. It's not a contradiction, it's a masterpiece of legal nuance.
And that leaves us with a final thought to chew on. This whole ancient debate. It's not just about lost rings, is it? It's a really profound look at how we, as humans, handle layered doubt. How does this kind of thinking, balancing practical assumptions against absolute moral principles, shape our own modern ideas about risk, about probability, and even about justice? Thanks for joining us for this explainer.